You know what's really funny? The entire what could have been angle of certain players and prospects throughout the course of the Vancouver Canucks and their history, that is something that we have explored already. If you go onto our YouTube channel and you just look for what could have been in quotation marks specifically, you will find older videos that we made talking about how Jordan Subban was supposed to be better than PK, how Hunter Shinkaruk was Patrick Kane light, and he ended up becoming a brief Canucks memory. How Ronnie Kennens could have been the Canucks' diamond in the rough, and how Cole Castles almost became the Connor McDavid kryptonite. The entire what could have been angle of Vancouver Canucks players and prospects will always stand out to me. But it's rarely a term or a conversation that we bring about talking about players that are currently on the team. Except, I guess, if you're talking about Olli Juolevi. That's an entire thing that probably wasn't working out all too well even when he was on the team. But today we're talking about Elias Pettersson. We're going over some of the other teams that have poked around on him and just some of the narratives that have built themselves up over the last few days surrounding Petey and his NHL future. We'll open this video up by looking at this article on HabsFanatics.com by Elias Edmondson. This was from yesterday, but as is the material on HabsFanatics.com, sometimes they go out there and report on stuff that was talked about weeks ago and then make new articles about it in the now. It is kind of annoying, but they do write about how the Canadiens were a team that was at one point interested in Elias Pettersson. It cites a David Pagnotta post from Hello Hockey last month that describes how there were a bunch of teams that poked around on Petey. Detroit did before the Dylan Larkin situation. Montreal did to a degree. Toronto to a degree. Philly to a degree. LA, and then you could also throw in the Pittsburgh Penguins because they were one of the newer teams that inserted themselves into that conversation. Now, here's the funny part. We have already made videos about all these teams discussing whether or not they could make an Elias Pettersson trade work, whether or not they have the assets to satisfy Vancouver, and whether or not they're willing or able to take on the contract at its full value of $11.6 million a year. But when you talk about that contract, 11.6 mil, we are now entering a stage where the money isn't as bad as maybe it seemed to have been when the contract initially kicked in at the start of the 2024-2025 campaign. You see, in 2023-2024, the year where Pettersson ended up signing his extension in the first place, he still had 89 points in 82 games played. Over a point per game guy, half a point a game in the playoffs. You could definitely see that the fall off was right around the January-February mark of 2024, which coincidentally was the best season the Vancouver Canucks had had in a long time. Quinn Hughes winning the Norris, Demko getting nominated for the Vezina, Rick Tocchet winning the Coach of the Year, and JT Miller scoring 100 points. Pettersson was a 100-point player the year before, but the season where he got the contract extension, things were going wrong with his injury, and you could also tell that there was some sort of an agenda internally that wanted to push this guy to heights beyond his capability, personality-wise and potentially even physically. It just blew up in the Canucks' face. And this is why when you look at this post made by JFresh, take a look at this. This is from 2 years ago when Elias Pettersson signed his contract extension. Pettersson, extended 8 years by 11.6 by Vancouver, is an elite number one center whose extreme efficiency all over the ice and his ability to orchestrate offense from distance leads to high production rates, especially primary assists. This was the player card for Petey back in the day. A 98 percentile wins above replacement. 88% even strength offensive percentage, 54% defensive percentage, and his power play, finishing, primary assists were all 95 plus. He drew penalties like crazy in his best years as well. Elias Pettersson was a different animal. And this is why when you look at some of the responses, I mean, Blake Price retweeted this tweet from JFresh from 2 years ago, just yesterday, and he said, hey, I was searching for Elias Pettersson rumors, and this old tweet came up. It was from just over 2 years ago. My goodness, how was this guy so good? And now he's so mid. Top reply says, his contract would be a steal right now if he didn't go to crap. This is why you don't sell low. If Pettersson's production fell off after an injury, that's different. Get a good offer for him or hang on to him and work to get the value back. I'll never understood why Taka took Pettersson off the penalty kill. Petey and Miller were the NHL's top shorthanded scorers. They had a good thing going with Miller and Petey working together. Then Taka just pulled the plug on those two working as a PK duo. Taka was never happy. Now, there are still ways that you can talk about Pettersson that acknowledge the skills that he does have today. It's funny because if you look at the Elias Pettersson JFresh player card in 2026, the numbers of even strength offense and defense are essentially flipped. Like, he is a much more efficient defensive player at even strength now compared to offensively, and that comes across in the point production as well. Pettersson had 51 points in 74 games this previous season. That's okay for a normal NHL player, but this guy was a top-line center at one point, and he was a 100-point player at one point. Pettersson is certainly an inferior player talent-wise and ceiling-wise compared to what he once was. I'm not going to say that the 100-point profile is 1,000,000% dead. It's not existent within his brain anymore. There's a part of me that believes that with the right mental shift and focus on the ice, Pettersson could become a 100-point player again, but I'd say that at this point in time, the two guys who have really started to fall from grace at the peak of their careers down to what they are now, you've got Pettersson and then you've got Jonathan Huberdeau in Calgary. I'd say these are the two biggest glow downs in the NHL right now. Which is why the conversation of trades is so interesting. If the Detroit Red Wings are impatient, if their new general manager is not as ironclad as Steve Yzerman was, could the Detroit Red Wings push to acquire Elias Pettersson? We know that Detroit's scouting staff really liked Petey the entire time, it seemed. But now, with Yzerman out of the picture in a managerial role, do the Detroit Red Wings push a little further to try to get a Pettersson trade done? What about the Montreal Canadiens? They've already gone through the ringer and kind of just missed out on all the other top 6 options available to them in this offseason. They couldn't get Nyes, they didn't get Marchenko, they couldn't get Robertson, and Anthony Mantha ended up signing in New Jersey. Could they fix their sights onto Elias Pettersson and try to acquire one of the better top 6 centers who is a very good defensively minded guy to maybe give Nick Suzuki a little bit of a rest here? I know Nick Suzuki ended up winning the Selke Trophy as the NHL's best defensive forward in the league, but Elias Pettersson is a guy that probably could alleviate some of that pressure. I'm not saying that he's better than Nick Suzuki as a defensive center, but I will say that having 2 defensive centers probably allows Nick Suzuki a little more leeway to do offensive things, right? The LA Kings, having Panarin and Pettersson together would be awesome. The Philadelphia Flyers, absolutely not. There is no way Elias Pettersson is going to thrive in a Rick Tocchet-coached environment. That did not work already. That's an experiment nobody wants to try again. The Toronto Maple Leafs are interesting because after acquiring Gavin McKenna, who knows where their direction is going down. We know the Maple Leafs want to make the most of Austin Matthews, but how far are they willing to go with that? And then you have the Pittsburgh Penguins, the other team that we've been talking about a whole bunch over the past few weeks. I'd say if the Ruck Twins are involved, I'd love to see Pettersson get traded for the Ruck Twins. Just to really bolster up the future core for Vancouver with guys that want to be Canucks and guys that cheered for the Canucks growing up. Although apparently Pettersson was destined to play in Vancouver based off of the t-shirt that he wore when he was a little boy. You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the weird shift in talent that Elias Pettersson went throughout the past 2 years? Thoughts in the comment section about Detroit, Montreal, Toronto, LA, Philly, potentially Pittsburgh poking their head around on Petey? And do you think any of these teams have what it takes to actually make a trade go through? You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.